I'm Lester Holt. Tonight on Dateline, a dead body in a yard. Terror in the night. The end of a family. The start of a mystery.
My dad was my best friend.
He just liked to make people smile.
My brother and his friend came running down to the neighbor's house.
Just call 911.
Okay, I'm telling you.
Oil Police Department, can you come down here, ma'am? What is going on?
His body appeared to be concealed.
A robber is not going to take the time to cover your body. It's personal.
There may be some tenants that had bad blood.
You gamble all the time.
Doors were padlocked.
It seemed like it was forever, but it was maybe a 10-second silence in the courtroom.
He was an FBI agent.
Dealt with many criminals.
He could take care of himself.
At least he thought so.
The house.
A young man walks toward his house in the middle of the evening. He's wearing a GoPro camera to do that. Now, if it sounds strange for someone to start recording a video of their own actions, well, stay tuned. This is actually one of the less weird things you'll hear about. Terrifying.
Call 911.
What's going on?
What he found that night would spark an investigation and a mystery that would only deepen over time. It's all linked to the drama that began just hours earlier when a daughter couldn't find her father. Scott Holt, 23 years as an FBI special agent. Even in retirement, he still scheduled his life like clockwork.
If he did something, he normally did that same thing every single day at the same time. He never slept in either. He was up every morning at 7:30.
Scott's daughter Kelly was living on her own by age 18 morning with the same phone call.
Your dad called to wake you up every day.
Yeah, he would call and say, "Are you up?" And then 5 minutes later, he would call and say, "Are you up?"
Oh, so he's not just the alarm clock, he's also the snooze alarm.
Yeah.
Except on that morning, March 16th, 2017, Kelly's phone was silent.
So I texted him. The phone went straight to voicemail. I texted him and I said, "I hope you're okay."
This is unlike him?
Totally.
He would respond to you.
Yeah.
Kelly reached out to her dad's next-door neighbors, Marty and Cindy.
Kelly called and asked me if I'd seen Scott all day, and I said no, I hadn't.
And she said, call a wellness check. So I called the Laurel Police. They came out.
His name's Scott, right? Yeah.
Officers from the Laurel, Maryland Police Department met Kelly at the house to do what's called a welfare check. When police go to an address, essentially to make sure something bad hasn't happened.
We walked through the house.
Laurel Police. Laurel Police Department.
They moved from room to room.
So my dad normally would take the dogs out to make sure they went potty outside, and there was right.
Since like the day before.
Right.
We'll be down here.
They went into the basement. Another officer searched upstairs. Officer Matt Zimmerman was there.
Nothing appeared to be in disarray. Nothing appeared to have a struggle.
I'm gonna take my dog.
She grabbed some belongings. Her father.
Do you want to report missing, or? I guess we'll wait till later. Okay.
Later eventually arrived, and Kelly still hadn't heard from her dad.
By this time, you have to be really scared.
I was.
Kelly had been talking with her older brother Riley. He hadn't seen their dad since the night before and was worried too. So that evening, Riley went over to... That's when Riley hit record on his GoPro and headed up the lawn of his family's large suburban home. As they walked, Riley and his friend heard banging and clattering on the left side of the house. And when they went to the area where the sounds had come from, they could make out a tarp in the darkness. They lifted it up, where his sister Kelly was waiting.
Just call 911.
Okay, I'm calling.
I need a police officer, EMS.
What do you mean?
Kelly ran to the house.
I didn't understand understand what was happening.
They saw a body. They didn't know who it was?
I honestly don't remember. I was so, my adrenaline kicked in and I ran up to the house and I stopped at crying and screaming.
So went out to the porch and saw her prostrate in the snow, just screaming. It was 10 minutes or so before I could understand what she was saying.
Which was what?
That her dad was dead.
For the second time, Officer Zimmerman was first on the scene.
My father is under... What is that?
Where he found the body.
Right here. I can't look. He's got right...
Scott Horn was dead. Now the mechanics of a murder investigation began.
You got crime scene tape? Where's the body? Got a couple more units here. Gonna have a potential crime scene.
When we return, a bomb in the house, apparently unaware of it all.
Hello, Royal Police Department. Could you come down here, ma'am? What? Well, we're just conducting an investigation right now, ma'am.
And whoever murdered Scott Horn didn't just kill him. This was overkill.
So someone shoots him from behind, and then after he's on the ground, begins beating him. Police were swarming the house on this quiet residential road. Scott Horn had been found by his son. He'd been murdered in his own backyard.
Can you all contact Kezzy?
Detective Kezzy Henderson came to lead the order to tell him Scott Horn had been the victim of a brutal murder. And it wasn't just a beating. Another investigator noticed a bullet lodged in a shed.
Scott was shot in the neck.
Would the neck wound have killed him by itself?
No, the neck wound would have disabled him.
So someone shoots him from behind, and then after he's on the ground, begins beating him.
That's correct.
Could you tell what he was beaten with?
He was beaten. No, when I unable to find that.
Unable to find it, maybe because next to the body was a wood-burning stove. It connected to a boiler that heated the whole house. Scott had installed the system. He was quite proud of it. Suddenly, it seemed Scott's own accomplishment might have helped his killer destroy the murder weapon.
That's correct.
Detective Henderson had a sense of how Scott died. To get to the who, the detective needed more about his victim's life. And right there at the crime scene, family and friends were eager to talk.
I go right up to the officers and I identify who I am and I let them know that he's one of ours. They know he's a retired FBI agent.
Monique Winkus had been one of seeing both an FBI agent and a friend of the victim in that situation.
It is. It's a tough place to be. You want to do so much more.
You're more friend than special agent in that moment.
Yes. I'm there for the family. I'm there for him.
Not surprising. That was the way Scott had been there for the Bureau. He'd carried FBI credentials for more than 2 decades after serving in the Air Force.
He just liked to, he would say, listen, just be honest with us, work with us, and I'll talk to the prosecutors, I'll talk to my boss, we'll see what we can do for you.
And then you would come in and put them in a chokehold.
Right, exactly. Tell us the truth.
On drug cases, bank robberies, and kidnappings, Scott Horn's good cop persona came in handy. After a while, family considerations made checks for people seeking government jobs.
That squad handled polygraphs, presidential appointments, new recruits came through that squad.
Now, that's not exactly the sexiest of FBI details.
It's not something that everyone shoots for, but it really had consistent hours.
It's a dad schedule.
It's a dad schedule, exactly.
Scott's wife, Ann, worked long shifts as a nurse. Their daughter...
Sure that we ate a well-balanced meal every night, and he made sure we went to bed on time, and all of our homework got done, and that our clothes were clean. My dad was my best friend. He took me everywhere with him and taught me so much.
Scott loved his family, including the 4-legged members.
Mama Bear, there was Papa Bear.
And to family, Scott's passion for this 4-bedroom house. It had more than just his fingerprints on it.
Our house is so wonderful. I know it sounds really conceited, but it is. It's something to be proud of.
And a lot of the nice things about it he had personally worked on.
Oh, yeah. Lots of projects. Solar panels, wood-burning stove. You know, the pool had solar panels. He was excited and did in the house.
Now, that house Scott had loved so much had become a crime scene. Outside, officers stood watch. But inside...
Hello, police department. Could you come down here, ma'am?
Someone was walking down the stairs.
Who else lives here? Anyone else?
My husband.
Your husband?
And Riley's mom. Anne appeared to have no idea what was transpiring just outside her front door.
What's going on?
Well, we're conducting an investigation right now, ma'am.
For what?
It would be up to a detective to tell Anne what was going on.
There's a man deceased over in the yard. Okay?
There's a deceased man.
Did Scott have money problems?
I know he gambles all the time.
Or other problems?
We did receive leads that there may be some tenants that had bad blood.
When Dateline continues.
I tried to get a second...
Anderson thought it best to keep some details of Scott Horn's murder to himself.
Ma'am, Detective Henderson?
So as he talked with Scott's wife Anne in the couple's kitchen, Henderson was careful not to share everything he knew.
Where's Scott at?
The last I saw Scott was early this morning.
There's a man deceased over in the yard.
Man in my yard?
I haven't...
Anne seemed to have no idea what was going on. And if you're wondering why Anne hadn't been out searching for her husband earlier, the answer is that after 2 decades of marriage, Anne and Scott were living separate lives under the same roof, while negotiating a divorce.
He doesn't talk to me. I mean, he's gone most of the day, every day. I don't know what else to tell you.
Right away, Anne helped police with this detail, where Scott had likely been the night before his body was found.
I know he gambles all the time.
He'd been at a casino.
We established a timeline for him, and we wanted to look at maybe someone followed him.
Spending some of his final hours playing cards. After midnight, he cashed out and headed to his car. How do you know he wasn't followed coming back from the casino?
The video footage of him walking around inside the casino, he's by himself. There was no one tagging along behind him. When he went to his car, there's no one following him in the parking garage.
The night of his murder, Scott Horn won less than $100, a high roller.
I wouldn't call it gambling. If anything, when my dad went to play, he would go and strategize what table was the best table to sit at because of winning.
Detective Henderson still had to determine if this was a random crime of opportunity, a robbery gone wrong. Investigators at the scene...
We checked into the activity on his bank cards. There were no activity. In my experience, when a robber takes property from a victim, they end up at a gas station.
And they're trying to use the cards as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Didn't happen.
No, not in this case.
And anyway, the crime scene was telling the investigators this wasn't random.
Was assaulted.
Because whoever murdered him shot him. He falls to the ground. They could have shot him again, but instead they choose to beat him to death.
That's correct.
Which sounds like anger.
It does.
As an FBI agent for 23 years, Scott Horn had come into contact with plenty of bad guys, many of whom might have carried a grudge. So they looked at Scott's cases and found a whole lot of nothing.
There had never been any threats in his past that I'm aware of. There had never been anything like that I'm going to get you or curse you.
And even though that does happen...
It does.
But that didn't seem to apply with him.
That is correct. It did not apply with him.
So what about Scott's second career? After fixing up his own house, Lord, with more than a dozen tenants.
We did receive leads that there may be some tenants that had bad blood.
Detective Henderson found out Scott had recently evicted some people from one of his rental properties.
Any possibility those people could have been angry enough at Scott to want him dead?
We received that information. We followed up on that as a lead.
A lead that, like others, didn't go anywhere. Part of this mystery was closer to home. That included considering Scott's son Riley. Detectives knew the person who discovers the body is sometimes the murderer.
I want you, listen to me. I want you out front on the porch. Have a seat. Have a seat.
We brought Riley back to the station. He voluntarily came, and he also voluntarily gave us a detailed description and where he'd been.
But Detective Henderson quickly determined Riley had been at work all day.
As far as you know, he had no history of being at odds with his dad.
He actually loved his dad, and his dad was one of the stronger figures in his life as a mentor also.
Like Kelly, Riley said his dad had been his best friend. Big house looked beautiful from the outside. Inside was another story.
Coming up, life behind closed doors.
You sort of keep the details of this from other people?
Yeah, it's embarrassing. It got to the point where there were locks on everyone's doors.
The celebration of Scott Horn's life drew quite a crowd.
Nobody could make Scott laugh more than Scott could make Scott laugh.
There were jokes and tears. And there was an air of awkwardness, too. Scott's estranged wife was in the front row. Just about everyone who was close to Scott at home.
And I said, Scott, you should leave the house.
Debbie Wrightson Tessier was an FBI colleague and one of Scott's best friends. She says the clashes with Ann started years earlier, mostly over the kids.
What I saw, sometimes she would be really sweet and nice to the kids, and then she could just turn. Yeah, I saw that on occasion.
And he'd tell you about it other times.
Yeah.
It turned out Scott's friends were getting only glimpses of what happened at home. Daughter Kelly says growing up, her mother was volatile, sometimes violent.
You sort of keep the details of this from other people? Because, you know, you don't want everybody to know that you're living in this atmosphere?
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
Trouble for breaking a rule and having a Facebook account. And then for borrowing a pair of her mom's heels. For that, she says, Ann made her sleep in a hallway for months. Her dad, she said, pushed back.
We were in the hallway where I had been sleeping, and an argument arose, and my dad said that, that I deserved to have my bedroom back. Got so angry.
Out of nowhere, Kelly says, Ann pulled a handgun from underneath her bathrobe and pointed it at Scott.
She said, we made an agreement. You said I'm taking care of the kids, and if you get in my way, there's going to be a problem. Like, his whole demeanor changed. It was more like, okay, we're just going to take a step back.
And you leave the house.
Her gun again, call 911.
You never saw that gun again?
No.
Kelly says that happened about 5 years before the murder, and she says the fighting escalated in the years that followed.
It was bad. It got to the point where there were locks on everyone's doors, on the outside and on the inside.
Both spouses padlocked their bedroom doors to keep the other out, bound together, but unable to face one another. It was a toxic atmosphere that seemed beyond repair. Riley began recording his interactions with his own mother. That's why he was wearing a GoPro the night he went looking for his missing dad. By that point, the family home was already quite familiar to the Laurel PD.
How many?
Really, they were there a lot.
You lost count.
Yeah.
We didn't lose count. Between 2012 and the start of 2017, Laurel police responded to that home at least 15 times. Sometimes it was Ann calling. Sometimes it was Scott calling. Sometimes it was the kids. Sometimes they went down and filed paperwork on their own. We used second-degree assault to numerous protective orders, all of it representing more contact
contact with law enforcement and the criminal justice system than most of us have in a lifetime.
None of those cases resulted in criminal convictions for anyone. Kelly says her mom told her to move out of the house at 18. Scott, however, Debbie believes Scott may have underestimated his wife's resolve, and that Ann's engine was running on spite.
She said, he loves this house. She said, I hate this house. And if he thinks that he's going to live here and keep this house, he has another thing coming. She said, because I will take this house from him, and I can do it.
Detective Kezzy Henderson heard all of this and thought back to the first night he spoke with Ann. Was she really as clueless as she seemed?
There's a deceased man in my yard.
She seemed calm.
Maybe too calm, thought Detective Henderson, and definitely too...
He gambles all the time, and he's got a lot of people that are angry with him right now.
Scott has enemies. Scott has gambling problems.
Did you find any evidence that Scott had any enemies other than his wife?
No.
They did find evidence that Ann was likely home all day. She said as much to police. Doctors went to check on Scott. How could Ann not hear them? Investigators now believed Scott was already dead at the time of the welfare check. As for those sounds Riley said he heard by the side of the house when he went over there that night, he later told police there was more to that. He'd seen some. He said he believed that shadow was his mom. Police asked Ann about it that night.
I was outside to put wood on the fire, but that was it.
And you didn't see Scott out there?
No.
Investigators thought Ann was hiding something. Were they all just dead wrong?
Ann was very kind-hearted, very compassionate.
And wood chips in a washing machine.
It suggested a cleanup.
It suggested cleanup.
When Dateline continues.
Aaron's death.
Who is it?
His estranged wife Ann was quickly emerging as a prime suspect. Police spoke with neighbors like Cindy and Marty.
You thought it was Ann from the get-go?
I did, yes.
They say Ann seemed aggressive and never missed a chance to spread what they say were lies about Scott.
This is Ann.
Here's a voicemail Ann left them months before Scott was killed.
He's brutal. And because he ran the streets, until I married him at age 37, he was nothing but a man whore.
Another neighbor shared with police this video of an interaction she had with Ann on the street.
I left because I was...
Claiming her family was abusive to her.
You know, I have a really hard time believing that happened.
I know, because you're stupid. And you don't know how deceptive an FBI agent can be.
And as neighbors shared these stories, one name kept popping up. Jason Bird.
Jason Bird is, Warren.
He was one of Scott's contractors, and prosecutor Melissa Hopmeyer heard enough to make her think Jason should be investigated.
What was the gossip in that neighborhood? I mean, your people went out and talked with a bunch of neighbors.
That Ann was out to get Scott, that they had a very contentious divorce, that she was having an affair with Jason, and wanted to, I guess, I don't know, ride.
Ann denies they were anything more than friends. Still, police wondered if Ann's friend had helped her after the murder, maybe disposing of the gun and Scott's wallet and cell phone. It turns out Jason's truck was spotted at the house, and neighbor Cindy took this photo of what police thought was Jason leaving the house that afternoon. That led to a police theory.
He doesn't seem to be carrying anything in his hands. But I guess he could have had Scott's property in his pockets.
Yes, he could have had Scott's property in his pockets. He could have had the handgun in his pockets.
Weeks went by and there were no arrests. Kelly thought it was just a matter of time.
I never had any doubt that she did it.
You were still sure it was her?
Yes.
Dad? Impossible, says Ann's friend Rita Lipinski. She and Ann went to high school together. And Rita says Ann's life is marked by her goodness to others.
Ann was very kind-hearted, very compassionate.
She says Ann used that kind heart and compassion over her 30-year career as a nurse. Part of
Tell me how sometimes she would actually hum or softly sing to her patients, whether they were soldiers or infants.
Ann's background is not what you typically associate with someone who's a murderer.
Correct.
Ann's divorce attorney, Lauren Kaleka, says the picture police were getting was clapped, and she says, don't blame Ann for that.
Why was that house such a toxic place, and why didn't anyone want to leave?
So I think a lot of the issues that developed between Ann and Scott actually arose from their daughter Kelly. And Ann had a difference of opinion from Scott as to how to deal with Kelly.
Despite Ann's long hours at work, Lauren paints her and Kelly as an out-of-control teen.
There were many allegations that Ann made against Kelly that Kelly was physically violent with Ann.
Kelly denies all of that and says her mom lied. So was Ann mean, erratic, or violent? Her attorney Lauren says not at all. She was just a mom trying to compensate for her husband's lax parenting.
To deal with Kelly.
She says Scott had turned the kids against their mom. Kelly's story about the gun? Ann's lawyer says it never happened. And police found no proof Ann had ever bought a gun. And as for what neighbors and friends thought and heard, Lauren says Ann was just trying to defend her reputation and get a fair settlement.
Ann knew that Scott was going around telling these individual wife and a mother.
Lauren says she hoped the police suspicion of Ann would subside. It did not. Once again, body cams were rolling on June 30th, 2017.
Please open the door. Hi, put your hands behind your back, we have an arrest warrant.
At a hotel 2.5 miles from her former home, Ann Allen was arrested for Scott's murder.
It was like a weight off of our shoulders. You know, something's finally going to be done.
After Ann's arrest, the crime lab gave police some welcome news. Some wood chips found in the family washing machine had Scott's DNA on them.
It linked the house and the person in the house, which was Ann Allen, to the murder.
Even with this new evidence, prosecutors were worried. The case against Ann Allen was threatening to fall apart before it even got started.
Coming up.
From the moment Detective Henderson arrived on that scene, Ann was the one and only suspect.
Did detectives rush to judgment? And did the jury hear enough to make a judgment?
We were really
Charged with her husband's murder, Ann Allen pleaded not guilty and waited in jail for her trial to begin. Her friend Rita was stunned.
There's no way that Ann would do something so heinous. There is no way.
Ann's defense attorney, Andrew Jessic.
So she's in jail, and she just couldn't conceive that anybody could think that this lifelong nurse would harm anyone.
Jessic says he looked at the state's case and saw no real evidence. He says Cottle beating, since she walked with a cane or a crutch.
The scene itself is so important, and the manner of the killing. His forehead was demolished by whatever was hitting him, was presumably a piece of wood. And Ann just didn't have that strength.
I'm guessing the state responded to that by saying that people who are furious enough at other people can do superhuman things.
They can say that.
Not long after Ann was arrested, the state's case seemed to fray. After first arresting Jason Bird, prosecutors decided not to move forward and dropped all charges.
When we got to the point when we were going to present the evidence to the grand jury to make a decision, there wasn't enough.
Search warrants were executed for Jason's home, for his truck.
Correct.
And nothing. None of Scott's stuff was there.
Hoping a jury would see what they saw. A woman who appeared sweet and harmless, but was actually filled with murderous rage. But prosecutors were also hampered by what they could say in court.
Maryland law doesn't allow all prior bad acts to come in, and so because of that we were really limited to what the jury could hear about what really went on in that house.
Do they get a real...
I don't think they did.
The jury didn't get to hear just how toxic that marriage was. Didn't get to see the entirety of those police files on the family.
Because you're stupid.
And didn't get to hear any of those neighbors' recordings of Ann. Still, prosecutors said Ann was the only person who hated Scott enough to kill him.
It's personal.
Off the handle. You think that when she woke up that day, that was the plan?
I think she waited for him to get home that day. I think she knew he was going to go put a log or a few logs on. I think she waited and she went out there and attacked him.
Have you been outside? I was outside to put wood on the fire, but that was it.
And they said Ann's story about going outside to throw logs on the fire was beyond suspicious.
That shed would have had to step over Scott Horn's body.
And she saw nothing.
Saw nothing.
On top of her hatred for Scott, the state said there was another motive.
His life insurance.
How much?
So $500,000.
The prosecutors knew that defense attorneys would say Ann was physically too frail to beat Scott to death. So they were ready. A security camera, grudges. And other times, she did not.
The crutch and the cane would come and go. It seemed at will.
I mean, neighbors saw her both before and after walking around. She was fine. I mean, was she a person in her 60s? Absolutely. But she's not incapable of committing this crime.
The jury heard about the wood chips in the washer. Except, prosecutors couldn't prove that Ann's DNA was on Scott's body at all.
Juries like DNA.
Juries like DNA.
You didn't have it.
I didn't have it.
You go with ibuprofen or Advil every night.
Wine.
The defense thought prosecutors had every reason to worry, because they said there was zero proof Ann killed Scott. They argued the whole investigation.
I think 100% from the moment Detective Henderson arrived on that scene, Ann was the one and only suspect. And you can see it when you watch his first interaction with her in the kitchen.
Listen, if you know anything about that, then you need to be honest.
He was interacting with her like he knew that he found the person that did this, and that was it.
The defense argued there was nothing suspicious about Ann not seeing, and even police didn't find it when they went there for the welfare check that afternoon. The defense pushed back at the state's theory that Ann was motivated by money. Turns out she wasn't the beneficiary on that life insurance policy. Scott had taken her name off it. And a deep dive into the family finances showed this.
Scott had $220,000 plus in credit. Absolutely.
The defense rested, and jurors went to deliberate. After one day, they told the judge they were deadlocked. She sent them back, and on day 2, there was a verdict.
When the verdict was read, Ann just starts, wailing. Just wailing. And she kept on just saying, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you.
And when I heard the verdict, it was like, yes, the prayers were answered.
Ann Allen was found not guilty, and she was set free.
I think she got away with murder. Everybody got up and it was over. On to the next case.
Scott's friends at the FBI were devastated.
I wish there was more justice for him. He worked as an investigator, solving crimes.
Laurel police say they are still actively investigating. Ann can't be tried again. Since the verdict, Ann has moved to another state and has no contact with Kelly and Riley. They tell us they're moving forward and trying to live each day the way their dad would have.
You know, Riley and I determine how we do things by how we're doing it the Scott Horn way.
That's all for this edition of Dateline. We'll see you again next Friday at 9, 8 Central. And of course, I'll see you each weeknight for NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt. For all of us at NBC News, good night.
The House on Sycamore Ridge, Part I. The Silence, Chapter 1. The silence was the first thing Kelly noticed. Not an empty, peaceful silence, but a heavy, wrong one. It pressed in on her, thick and suffocating, the kind of quiet that follows a scream. Her phone, usually a source of constant, buzzing connection to the world, felt like a dead weight in her hand. 7:30 a.m. Then 7:35. Then 7:45. Each passing minute etched another line of worry onto her brow. Her father, Scott Horn, was a man governed by the unwavering precision of a clockmaker. For 23 years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had honed him into an instrument of routine and discipline, and retirement had only sharpened those edges. His life was a series of meticulously scheduled events, the most sacred of which was the 7:30 a.m. wake-up call to his daughter. "Are you up?" His voice would grumble, a familiar and comforting rasp through the speaker. 5 minutes later, the phone would ring again. "Are you up now?" He wasn't just her alarm clock. He was her snooze button, her daily assurance that the world was still spinning on its correct axis. But on the morning of March 16th, 2017, the axis felt tilted. The phone remained dark and silent. Kelly, already 18 and living in a small apartment of her own, felt the familiar tug of childhood anxiety. She typed out a text, her thumb hovering over the send button. "Dad? Everything okay?" The single gray checkmark beneath the message was a cold, digital rebuff. No blue ticks, not delivered. She tried calling. The line didn't even ring. A sterile, synthesized voice informed her that the person she was trying to reach was unavailable. It went straight to voicemail, a digital tomb where her father's cheerful, recorded greeting felt like a ghost. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Her father responded to texts with the same punctuality he applied to everything else in his life. He was a creature of habit, and his most ingrained habit was her. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed the name for their next-door neighbors, the Cunninghams. Marty answered on the second ring. "Marty, it's Kelly," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Have you seen my dad today?" "Can't say I have, sweetie," Marty's voice crackled. "Cindy's at the store. Is everything all right?" "I don't know. He didn't call me this morning and his phone's going to voicemail. It's not like him." "You want me to pop over and check?" "Would you? I'm sorry to bother you, but no bother at all. I'll go knock on the door." Kelly paced her small living room, the worn floorboards creaking under her feet. She pictured the house on Sycamore Ridge, the sprawling 4-bedroom home her father had built and perfected with his own hands. It was more than just a house. It was his life's work, a testament to his obsession with self-sufficiency and order. The solar panels he'd installed on the roof, the intricate wood-burning boiler system in the side yard that heated the entire property, the perfectly manicured lawn. Every nail, every wire, every pipe bore the mark of his meticulous attention. He loved that house with a fierce, possessive pride. It was his fortress. Her phone buzzed and she snatched it up. It was Marty. "No answer, Kelly. All the cars are in the driveway. The dogs are barking inside, though. Sound a little frantic, to be honest." The ice in her stomach spread to her chest. The dogs. Papa Bear and Kenai Bear. Her dad would never leave them inside for so long that they became distressed. "Call the police," she said, the words catching in her throat. "Please, Marty. Call for a wellness check." Chapter 2. The Laurel police cruiser pulled up to the curb, just as Kelly's beat-up Honda Civic sputtered to a stop behind it. She met the two officers on the pristine walkway her father swept clean every single morning, rain or shine. The house loomed over them, beautiful and imposing. From the outside, it was the picture of suburban tranquility. But Kelly knew the truth. She knew about the locks. Not just on the front door, but on the inside. Heavy, industrial padlocks on the bedroom doors, metallic symbols of a war fought in whispers and slammed doors. For the past 2 years, the house had not been a home, but a cold, divided territory. Her father controlled the main floor and the basement. Her mother, Anne, occupied the master suite upstairs. They were 2 prisoners sharing a cell, bound together by the deed to a house they both refused to surrender. The officers, Zimmerman and a rookie whose name she didn't catch, seemed to sense the strangeness of the situation. They walked the perimeter, peering into windows. Kelly gave them the spare key her dad had insisted she keep. The moment the front door opened, the smell hit them a sharp, acrid odor of ammonia. Puddles of dog urine stained the gleaming hardwood floors in the foyer. The 2 fluffy Samoyeds, usually boisterous and friendly, cowered in a corner, their tails tucked between their legs. "That's not right," Kelly whispered, her eyes stinging. He would have taken them out hours ago. Last night, the house was eerily still. The officers moved with a practiced, quiet efficiency, their voices low murmurs that echoed in the high-ceilinged rooms. They swept through the main floor, a space that was entirely Scott's domain. His favorite leather armchair was positioned perfectly in front of the television. A stack of books on military history sat on the side table, a pair of reading glasses resting on top. Everything was in its place, 2 in its place. They checked the basement, a sprawling workshop filled with tools that were hung on the pegboard walls with geometric precision. Nothing. Upstairs was Anne's territory. Officer Zimmerman ascended the carpeted stairs, calling out, "Laurel Police!" Kelly waited at the bottom, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She heard the muffled sound of a door opening, of voices. A few minutes later, Zimmerman came back down, his expression unreadable. "There's a woman upstairs," he said. "Says she's his wife. She hasn't seen him since yesterday. Said she assumed he was out." Kelly's blood ran cold. "She's here? She'd been in the house this whole time? While the dogs whined and fouled the floor? While Kelly was sick with worry? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense." The officers completed their search. Nothing appeared to be in disarray. There were no signs of a struggle. Scott Horn had simply vanished. They couldn't file a missing persons report yet. It hadn't been long enough. "We'll keep an eye out," Zimmerman said, his tone meant to be reassuring. "He'll probably turn up. Maybe he went to the casino and his phone died." Kelly nodded, but she didn't believe it. Not for a second. The casino was his one vice, a place he went to unwind, but he was never unreachable. She left with a hollow feeling of defeat. Taking a few of her father's things, as if clutching a piece of him could somehow keep him safe. The image of the padlocked doors, of her mother's silent presence upstairs, of the frightened dogs, and the cold, empty house, replayed in her mind. Throughout the afternoon, she called her older brother Riley. He was just as worried. He hadn't seen their dad since the previous evening. They agreed that the police check wasn't enough. Someone had to go back. Someone had to really look. As dusk settled, casting long skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns of Sycamore Ridge, Riley decided he would be the one. He grabbed a friend, and for reasons Kelly wouldn't understand until much later, he strapped a small GoPro camera to his chest and hit record. Chapter 3. The GoPro footage would later be dissected by detectives, lawyers, and jurors, each frame scrutinized for a clue they might have missed. But in the moment, it was just a shaky, raw feed of a son walking into a nightmare. The video shows 2 young men, their breath pluming in the cold March air, walking up the familiar driveway. The house is dark, a silent monolith against the deepening twilight. "Dad?" Riley's voice is tentative, a boy's call in the oppressive quiet. As they round the corner of the house, heading toward the side yard, a sound cuts through the silence. A sharp, metallic clatter, then a bang. It comes from the area near the woodpile and the hulking outdoor boiler. "What was that?" his friend whispers, his voice tight with fear. The camera jerks as Riley moves toward the sound. The low-light lens struggles to focus, rendering the scene in grainy shades of gray and black. They can make out a large, dark shape near the woodpile, a heavy-duty tarp, half covered in a light dusting of snow. It's lumpy, misshapen. The clattering sound comes again, louder this time. A shadow detaches itself from the deeper shadows by the house and flits away. The camera doesn't catch it clearly. Just a fleeting movement, a suggestion of a person. "Did you see that?" Riley breathes. They approach the tarp. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something coppery and metallic. With trembling hands, Riley reaches down and lifts a corner of the heavy plastic. The camera doesn't show what's underneath. It can't, because in that instant, Riley lets out a strangled gasp and stumbles backward, his friend grabbing his arm. The world tilts, the camera now pointing at the ground, then the sky, then the spinning, chaotic blur of pure terror. The audio, however, captures everything. The panicked, ragged breaths, the frantic crunch of feet on gravel, and Riley's voice, no longer a boy's, but a raw, primal scream of anguish. Call 911. Just call 911. He runs, not looking back, a desperate flight from the horror he has just uncovered. He sprints across the lawn to the Cunningham's house, where Kelly is waiting, her vigil of dread about to reach its terrible conclusion. She hears the pounding on the door and throws it open. Riley stands there, his face pale and slick with tears, his chest heaving. "What is it, Riley? What's wrong?" He can't form words. He just points back toward the house, his hand shaking uncontrollably. They saw a body. His friend stammers from behind him. They saw a body. Kelly doesn't remember running. She only remembers the cold air burning her lungs, the ground rushing up to meet her as her legs gave out at the edge of her father's meticulously cared-for lawn. She fell to her knees, the damp cold seeping into her jeans, and she screamed. She screamed for her father, for the silence to end, for the nightmare to be over. But the nightmare was just beginning. For the second time that day, Officer Matt Zimmerman pulled up to the house on Sycamore Ridge. This time, the flashing red and blue lights painted the tranquil suburban street in strobing, frantic colors of violence. This time, it wasn't a wellness check. It was a crime scene. He found Riley, still wearing the GoPro, pointing a trembling finger toward the side yard. Right there, he choked out. He's covered. Zimmerman approached the tarp. He lifted it. And there, lying in the cold, unforgiving dirt, was the master of the house. Scott Horn was dead. Part 2. The Investigation. Chapter 4. Detective Kesey Henderson arrived to a scene bathed in the sterile white glare of portable floodlights. The quiet suburban road had been transformed into a chaotic theater of law enforcement. Yellow tape cordoned off the house, a flimsy barrier against the profound violation that had occurred within its perimeter. Henderson was a man who moved with a deliberate, unhurried calm that belied the storm of activity around him. He took in the details with a practiced eye: the pristine house, the weeping children, the huddle of uniformed officers. He'd learned long ago that the truth of a crime wasn't in the big, dramatic gestures, but in the small, discordant details. The first detail was the body itself. Scott Horn had not just been killed, he had been desecrated. The medical examiner would later confirm the full, brutal story. A single gunshot wound to the neck, fired from behind. It was a debilitating shot, not an instantly fatal one. It would have dropped him to the ground, helpless. The killer had then stood over him and, with a terrifying rage, had bludgeoned him to death. "The weapon?" Henderson asked the crime scene tech. "We think it was firewood," the tech replied, gesturing to the neat stack of logs beside the boiler. He was beaten with incredible force. His skull is compromised. The piece they used is likely missing. Henderson's eyes went to the hulking metal boiler. A thin wisp of smoke curled from its chimney. "Or it's in there," he said, his voice a low growl. The perfect disposal unit, installed by the victim himself. The irony was as bitter as the cold night air. The second discordant detail was the victim's identity. A retired FBI agent. For 23 years, Scott Horn had navigated a world of criminals and informants. He was a man trained to see threats, to anticipate danger. And yet, he had been ambushed and executed in his own sanctuary. This wasn't a random act. This was personal. A robber doesn't take the time to cover a body with a tarp. A robber doesn't linger to beat a man who is already down. This was a murder fueled by pure, unadulterated hatred. As the mechanics of the investigation began to turn, a new sound emerged from the house. The front door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman, leaning on a single crutch, her expression one of mild confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Who are all you people?" It was Ann Allen, Scott's wife, Kelly and Riley's mother. She appeared to have no idea that her husband's broken body lay just 50 feet away. Henderson watched her, his senses on high alert. He had interviewed hundreds of grieving spouses. He knew the look of shock, of devastation, of gut-wrenching loss. He did not see it in Ann Allen's eyes. He saw a guarded curiosity, a strange and unnerving calm. He led her into the kitchen, the heart of the divided home. As they sat at the polished granite island, he chose his words carefully. "Ma'am, there's been an incident. There's a man deceased in the yard." Ann's eyes widened slightly. A deceased man? There was no panic in her voice, only a faint, detached surprise. "Where is Scott?" she asked. Henderson held her gaze. This was the moment. "The man in the yard," he said slowly, "is your husband." He watched for the mask to crack, for the grief to break through. It didn't. She blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. She told him she'd been home all day, upstairs in her room. She'd worked a long shift as a nurse the day before and had been resting. She heard nothing. She saw nothing. She was quick to offer theories. Scott had gambling problems, she said. He went to the casino all the time, flashing money. Maybe someone followed him home. He was a landlord, she added. He'd recently evicted some tenants. Maybe they held a grudge. He was an FBI agent for years. It could have been anyone from his past. She painted a picture of a man surrounded by enemies, a man whose life outside the house was a minefield of potential threats. But Henderson had already spoken to Scott's friends and colleagues. They described a man who was a strategic, low-stakes card player, not a high roller. They described a landlord who was firm but fair. And they described an FBI agent who had spent the last decade of his career on a quiet desk assignment, handling background checks. The dad schedule, they called it. The only enemy, the only source of rage and conflict they all mentioned, was the woman sitting right in front of him. Chapter 5. The portrait of the Horn family, as painted by those outside its walls, was one of escalating dysfunction. Scott's FBI partner, Debbie Wrightson-Tessier, described a man who was being slowly eroded by the toxicity of his own home. "I told him to leave," she recounted to Henderson, her voice thick with regret. "I said, 'Scott, get out of that house. It's killing you.' But he loved that house. And he wouldn't leave his kids." She spoke of Ann's mercurial temper, her ability to be sweet one moment and vicious the next. She recounted a conversation where Ann had allegedly seethed with resentment over the house Scott adored. She said, "He loves this house. I hate this house. If he thinks he's going to keep it, he has another thing coming. I will take this house and everything he has, and I can do it." The children's stories were even more harrowing. In a sterile interview room, a world away from the blood-soaked yard, Kelly described a childhood spent walking on eggshells. She spoke of her mother's volatility, of punishments that bordered on cruelty. The final straw had been a fight over a pair of borrowed shoes, an infraction for which Kelly claimed her mother had made her sleep in a hallway for months. "My dad tried to intervene," Kelly said, her voice barely a whisper. "He told her it was enough, that I deserved to have my bedroom back. And she got so angry." Kelly's account of what happened next was the story that turned the investigation on its head. She described her mother pulling a small handgun from the pocket of her bathrobe and pointing it directly at Scott's chest. She told him, "We made an agreement. I handle the kids. You stay out of my way, or there will be a problem." Scott, the trained federal agent, had de-escalated. He had backed away, taken Kelly, and left the house. His only words to his terrified daughter were, "If you ever see her with that gun again, you call 911. The story, if true, painted a picture not just of a volatile woman, but of one capable of premeditated, armed threats. The Laurel Police Department's records corroborated the narrative of a home in turmoil. Between 2012 and 2017, officers had responded to the address on Sycamore Ridge no fewer than 15 times. Domestic disputes, assault allegations, protective orders filed by both Scott and Ann. It was a thick, ugly file chronicling the complete disintegration of a marriage. As Henderson dug deeper, the house itself began to feel like the primary motive. It wasn't just a home. It was a prize in a bitter war of attrition. Scott had poured his life into it. Ann, it seemed, was determined to see him lose it. And then there was the timeline. Ann claimed she was home all day, resting. That meant she was there when Kelly and the officers had performed the initial wellness check. How could she not have heard them? How could she have remained cloistered in her room while the family dogs, just downstairs, were barking in distress? Riley's GoPro footage added another damning piece. He told police that the fleeting shadow he'd seen in the yard, the one that had made the clattering sound just before he discovered the body, was a figure he recognized. He was certain it was his mother. Henderson constructed a working theory, a chilling sequence of events. Anne, knowing Scott's routine, had waited for him to come home from the casino. She knew he would go to the side yard to feed logs into the boiler. She had ambushed him there, shooting him first to disable him, then unleashing years of pent-up fury in a final, brutal barrage. She had covered the body, perhaps intending to move it later, but was interrupted by Riley's arrival. The missing phone and wallet? A ruse. A clumsy attempt to make a deeply personal murder look like a random robbery. The wood chips with Scott's DNA later found in the family washing machine only strengthened the theory. It was evidence of a cleanup, a desperate, failed attempt to wash away the sins of that night. The investigation, which had started with a wide net of possibilities, a vengeful criminal, an angry tenant, a casino robbery gone wrong, had now narrowed to a single, terrifying point. All roads led back to the woman who slept upstairs, the woman who claimed she had seen and heard nothing. Part 3. The Accusation. Chapter 6. For 3.5 months, a fragile, unnerving peace settled over Sycamore Ridge. The yellow tape came down. The police cruisers left. But the house remained a monument to the tragedy, its windows dark and watchful. Kelly and Riley stayed with friends, unable to bear the thought of crossing the threshold. Anne, however, moved into a nearby hotel, a transient existence in the town where she had built a life. To her friends, like Rita Lipinski, who had known her since high school, Anne was a victim, not a suspect. She was a woman grieving the loss of her husband, however estranged, and now suffering under the weight of a cruel and unjust suspicion. Anne was the kindest person I knew, Rita would later say. A career nurse, she spent 30 years caring for people at their most vulnerable soldiers at Walter Reed, sick infants. She would hum to her patients to calm them. Does that sound like a murderer to you? Anne's divorce attorney, Lauren Kalakis, argued that the police were seeing the marriage through a distorted lens, one crafted by Scott and the children. She painted a different picture. Anne, the daughter of a strict Catholic family, was the primary disciplinarian. Scott was the permissive parent, the good cop, who undermined her authority at every turn. Kelly, she alleged, was not a victim but a troubled, rebellious teenager who had grown physically violent with her own mother. Anne was trying to hold the family together, Kalakis insisted. Scott was actively tearing it apart, poisoning the children against her, spreading lies about her to his friends and colleagues to gain an advantage in the divorce. The story of the gun? A complete fabrication, according to Kalakis. A dramatic lie concocted by a daughter to demonize her mother. Police records confirmed they could find no evidence that Anne had ever purchased or owned a handgun. But the investigators were undeterred. The circumstantial evidence was a tightening web. There was the neighbor's security camera, which captured footage of Anne walking around without her crutch on several occasions, suggesting her frailty was perhaps an act. There were the voicemails she'd left for neighbors, filled with vitriol for Scott, and there was the constant presence of another man, Jason Berg. Berg was a contractor Scott had hired for work on his rental properties. Over time, he had become a friend and confidant to Anne. Neighbors reported seeing his truck at the house frequently, including on the afternoon of the murder. A neighbor had even snapped a photo of a man she believed to be Jason leaving the house just hours before Scott's body was found. The police theory evolved. Anne hadn't acted alone. After the murder, she had called Jason to help her. He had disposed of the murder weapon, Scott's wallet, and his phone. He was her accomplice. On June 30th, 2017, the waiting ended. The body cam footage showed officers knocking on a hotel room door. Anne Allen opened it, her face a mask of confusion. "What's going on?" she asked. The same words she had spoken on the night of the murder. This time, the answer was different. They had a warrant. She was under arrest for the first-degree murder of her husband. Jason Berg was arrested later that day. For Kelly and Riley, the news was a profound relief. It was like a weight off our shoulders, Kelly said. Finally, something was going to be done. Finally, there would be justice for our dad. Chapter 7. In the sterile confines of the county jail, Anne Allen's world shrank to a concrete box. Her defense attorney, Andrew Jezik, found a woman who seemed bewildered by her circumstances, unable to comprehend that anyone could believe she was capable of such a monstrous act. "She's a nurse," Jezik said. "Her entire life has been about preserving life. The state's theory is an absurdity." He immediately went on the offensive. He attacked the police investigation as a textbook case of tunnel vision. From the moment Detective Henderson walked into that kitchen, Ann was his one and only suspect, Jezik argued. He wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for evidence to confirm his bias. They ignored every other possibility. He dismantled the state's case piece by piece. The brutality of the crime, he argued, pointed away from his client. Ann was a woman in her 60s who walked with a cane. The idea that she could overpower a former FBI agent and beat him to death with a log was preposterous. The state's star accomplice, Jason Berg, was becoming a problem for the prosecution. Search warrants for his home and truck turned up nothing. No gun, no wallet, no phone. Not a single piece of physical evidence connected him to the crime. Faced with a case that was evaporating before their eyes, the prosecutors made a stunning decision. They dropped all charges against Jason Berg. Suddenly, Ann was alone on the indictment. The state's narrative now had to be that this physically limited woman had single-handedly committed the brutal murder, cleaned up the evidence, and concealed the body. Jezik focused on the crime scene. It was pitch black on the night of the murder. The police themselves hadn't found the body during their initial daylight search. How could Ann, in the dark, have been expected to see her husband's body lying under a tarp? Her story of going outside to throw logs on the fire without seeing anything was not just plausible, it was likely. And then there was the motive. The prosecution claimed it was about the house and a $500,000 life insurance policy. But Jezik presented documents proving that Scott had removed Ann as the beneficiary years ago. Furthermore, a deep dive into the couple's finances revealed a staggering truth. Scott Horn was drowning in debt. He owed over $220,000 on more than 20 different credit cards. As his legal wife, Ann wasn't inheriting a fortune. She was inheriting a mountain of debt. The financial motive didn't just disappear. It was inverted. The case against Ann Allen was built on a foundation of her children's testimony, her neighbors' suspicions, and her own strange, unnerving calm. There was no DNA linking her to the body. There was no murder weapon. There was no confession. There was only the shadow of a doubt, and the question of whether that shadow was large enough to obscure the truth forever. Part 4. The Trial. Chapter 8. The courtroom was a sterile, airless space, a far cry from the sprawling, custom-built house at the center of the case. Ann Allen sat at the defense table, looking small and frail. Her attorney, Andrew Jezik, a constant, reassuring presence at her side. Across the aisle, Kelly and Riley sat in the front row, their faces tense, watching the woman they called Mom prepare to stand trial for their father's murder. The prosecution, led by Melissa Hopmeyer, faced an uphill battle from the start. A key ruling by the judge hamstrung their case. The extensive history of domestic violence calls, the protective orders, the ugly details of the couple's marital war, most of it was deemed inadmissible. The jury would not be allowed to see the full, toxic picture of life inside the house on Sycamore Ridge. They would have to build their case on the events of a single night. Hopmeyer's opening statement painted a picture of a woman consumed by hate. This wasn't a robbery, she told the jury, her voice ringing with conviction. This wasn't a crime of passion that spiraled out of control. This was a cold, calculated execution. The defendant, Ann Allen, waited for her husband to come home. She waited for him to go to that woodpile, a routine she knew as well as her own. And then, in the darkness of his own backyard, she attacked him. The state presented its evidence. The testimony of Kelly and Riley was powerful and emotional. The jurors saw the shaky GoPro footage of the discovery. They heard from the officers who had found Ann to be disturbingly calm. They were shown photos of the wood chips found in the washing machine, which the prosecution argued was proof of a cleanup. But on cross-examination, Jezik chipped away at their certainty. He questioned Kelly about her troubled teenage years, subtly suggesting she had a motive to lie. He forced the police to admit that no DNA, not a single hair or fiber, connected Ann to her husband's body. He presented the evidence of Scott's massive debt, casting doubt on any financial motive. His most effective tool was the crime scene itself. He played Riley's GoPro video again and again, pausing it in the grainy darkness. You see that, ladies and gentlemen? he asked the jury. "You see anything?" "Of course you don't. It was pitch black." The Laurel Police Department, with flashlights, searched that very area and found nothing. Yet the state wants you to believe that my client, a woman who needs a crutch to walk, not only committed this brutal murder but also saw the body she was supposedly trying to conceal when she went out to tend the fire. It defies logic. The defense's case was short and devastatingly simple. They argued that Scott Horn was a man with many secrets, chief among them his catastrophic financial situation. Who knew what desperate measures he had resorted to? Who knew who he owed money to? The police, Jezik claimed, had never bothered to find out. They had locked onto the estranged wife from the very first hour and never looked away. The trial lasted for days, a slow, methodical presentation of two completely irreconcilable realities. In one, Ann Allen was a monster, a master manipulator who had fooled everyone with a veneer of frailty. In the other, she was the ultimate victim of a toxic marriage, of her husband's secrets, and of a biased and incompetent police investigation. The jury went out to deliberate. One day passed, then another. The courthouse buzzed with tension. Late on the second day, a note was passed to the judge. The jury was deadlocked. The judge sent them back, urging them to try one more time. Hours later, they returned. The foreman, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, handed the verdict to the clerk. Kelly and Riley held hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Ann Allen stared straight ahead, her face a pale, unreadable mask. The clerk unfolded the paper. In the matter of the state versus Ann Allen, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant. He paused, taking a breath that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Not guilty. Epilogue. A single, piercing wail shattered the courtroom's stunned silence. It came from Ann Allen. It was a sound of profound, shuddering relief. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing, repeating the same words over and over. "Thank you, God. Thank you, God." Her friend Rita rushed to embrace her. The prayers, she thought, had been answered. Across the aisle, the world had tilted off its axis for Kelly and Riley Horn. The verdict was a physical blow, knocking the air from their lungs. It was over. The trial they had waited for, the justice they had prayed for, had ended in this cold, unbelievable pronouncement. Their mother, the woman they were certain had murdered their father, was free. In the aftermath, the family, already broken, was irrevocably shattered. Ann Allen moved to another state, disappearing from their lives completely. The house on Sycamore Ridge, the source of so much love and so much pain, was sold. Its new owners would never know the full story of the secrets held within its walls. The murder of Scott Horn remains officially unsolved. A cold case, a file in a box. Kelly and Riley tried to move on, to build lives out of the wreckage. They found themselves guided by a simple question, a mantra that became their compass. What would Dad do? They lived their lives the Scott Horn way, with discipline, with purpose, and with an unshakable sense of loyalty to each other. But on quiet nights, when the world was still, the silence would return. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, wrong one. The silence of unanswered questions. The silence of a crime without justice. The silence of a house on a quiet suburban street where a good man had been brutally murdered and where the terrible, unknowable truth was left buried in the cold, dark earth. The ridiculously unfortunate demise of the man who loved his house too much. Part 1. The Unacceptable Silence. Chapter 1. In which an alarm clock fails to perform its duties. The first sign that the universe had slipped a cog and was rolling lopsidedly into chaos was the silence. Not the gentle, birds chirping kind of silence that home decor magazines promise, but a thick, gelatinous silence. A silence with weight. It was the kind of quiet that suggests something very loud should be happening, but isn't, and the sheer wrongness of it makes your teeth itch. For Kelly Horn, this particular silence was an affront to the natural order of things. It was 7:30 a.m. on the dot, a time as sacred in the Horn household as the winter solstice at Stonehenge. At precisely this moment, every single morning, her phone was supposed to detonate with the gravelly, semi-conscious grumble of her father, Scott Horn. Scott was a man for whom the phrase creature of habit was a laughable understatement. He was the high priest of routine, the Dalai Lama of doing the exact same thing every single day. 23 years in the FBI had taken a man with a mild preference for order. and pressure cooked him into a diamond-hard paragon of predictability. Retirement hadn't mellowed him. It had given him more time to focus on his true passion, scheduling. His most inviolable ritual was the 7:30 a.m. Kelly wake-up protocol. "Are you up?" his voice would rasp, a sound akin to a bear gargling with sandpaper. Then, precisely 5 minutes later, a follow-up call. "Are you up now?" He was less an alarm clock and more a human snooze button with a government pension. He was the daily, low-grade harassment that assured Kelly the planet was still spinning correctly. But on this particular Thursday in March, the planet was evidently having a lie-in. The phone remained as dark and silent as a politician's conscience. Kelly, a newly minted 18-year-old who had only recently escaped the gravitational pull of her parents' home for the glorious freedom of a tiny, overpriced apartment, felt a familiar pang of dread. It was the same feeling she used to get when she heard her parents discussing the household budget in hushed, angry whispers. Her thumbs, slick with a sudden, inexplicable sweat, typed out a message. "Dad, you alive in there?" She watched the screen. A single, taunting gray checkmark appeared. The digital equivalent of a shrug. Not delivered. Not even close. The message was just floating out there in the ether, lonely and ignored. She tried calling. The call didn't even have the courtesy to ring. It was immediately shunted into the digital abyss of voicemail. Her father's recorded voice, a chipper, "Hey, it's Scott. Leave a message and I'll make it a federal case to call you back," felt like a dispatch from a bygone era. A small, cold squid of anxiety took up residence in her stomach. This wasn't just unusual. It was fundamentally, cosmically wrong. Her father responded to texts with the speed and efficiency of a SWAT team breaching a door. He was a man who considered 5 minutes a dangerously long time to let a notification go unanswered. His most ingrained habit wasn't just routine. His most ingrained habit was her. Her finger flew through her contacts list, past annoying Aunt Carol and dentist, avoid, and landed on Marty next door. Marty Cunningham answered with a cheerful boom that made Kelly's phone vibrate. "Marty, it's Kelly," she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. "Weird question, but have you seen my dad?" "Can't say that I have, kiddo." Marty's voice crackled, sounding like it was being broadcast from a ham radio on the moon. "Cindy's out wrestling for the last carton of organic milk at the Piggly Wiggly. Everything okay?" "I don't think so. He missed the morning roll call, and his phone is dead to the world. That's like a level 10 DEFCON alert for him. You want me to amble over and bang on the door? Would you? I know it's a pain, but I'm officially freaking out." "No pain at all. Gives me an excuse to put on pants. Stand by." Kelly began to pace her shoebox-sized living room, the floorboards groaning in protest. She pictured the house on Sycamore Ridge. It wasn't just a house. It was her father's Sistine Chapel, a 4-bedroom, 3-bath monument to one man's obsessive-compulsive love affair with home improvement. He hadn't just built it, he had curated it. The solar panels on the roof were aligned with military precision. The wood-burning boiler system he'd cobbled together in the side yard was a steampunk marvel of pipes and gauges that heated the entire property, probably with the thermal output of a small star. The lawn was so perfect, it looked like CGI. Scott Horn didn't just own a house. He was in a deeply committed, long-term relationship with it. It was his fortress of solitude, his masterpiece, his heavily mortgaged baby. Her phone buzzed violently on the counter, and she lunged for it. It was Marty. "Okay. Operation. Check on Scott is a bust. Cars are all there. But the dogs, Kelly. The dogs are going absolutely bananas inside. Sounds like a canine reenactment of the fall of Saigon." The cold squid in her stomach flash froze and expanded. The dogs. Papa Bear and Kenai Bear. 2 fluffy white Samoyeds that her father treated with more reverence than the Constitution. He would sooner perform his own root canal with a rusty spoon than let those dogs get distressed. "Call the police," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign and metallic in her mouth. "Marty, I'm not kidding. Call for a wellness check. Tell them it's a code red." Chapter 2, in which we learn about locks and urine. The Laurel Police Department, presumably having nothing better to do on a Thursday morning than investigate the potential malaise of a suburban dad, arrived with commendable speed. Kelly's sputtering Honda pulled in right behind the cruiser, and she met the 2 officers on the walkway. a stretch of concrete so immaculately clean you could probably eat off it, though her father would have strongly advised against it. There was Officer Zimmerman, a man with a mustache that looked like it had seen things, and a rookie who looked so young he might still need a permission slip to use his firearm. They stood for a moment, just looking at the house. From the street, it was a Rockwell painting. The perfect lawn, the tasteful shutters, the robust American flag fluttering proudly from the porch. It radiated a powerful aura of stability and successful property tax payments. But Kelly knew the truth. The real story wasn't on the outside. It was on the inside, written in steel. She knew about the locks. Not the quaint brass ones on the front door, but the thick, brutish, industrial-grade padlocks bolted onto the bedroom doors. They were the clanking, metallic scars of a marital Cold War that had been raging for years. The house wasn't a home. It was a duplex with a shared kitchen and a whole lot of resentment. Her father, Scott, held the downstairs and the basement. Her mother, Anne, reigned over the master suite upstairs, a fortress within a fortress. They were like East and West Berlin, coexisting under one roof, bound by a mortgage and mutual stubbornness. Zimmerman and the rookie, bless their hearts, seemed to pick up on the weird vibes immediately. They exchanged a look that said, "This feels off." Kelly handed them the spare key her father had given her with the solemnity of passing on a state secret. The moment the door swung open, a wave of olfactory horror washed over them. It was the pungent, weaponized stench of ammonia, dog urine. Not a small, discreet puddle, but a veritable lake of it, glistening on the otherwise pristine hardwood floors. The two fluffy Samoyeds, who were usually ecstatic blurs of white fur and slobber, were huddled in a corner, trembling, looking deeply ashamed of their bladder-related failures. "Oh, that's not good," Kelly whispered, her eyes watering, though whether from the fumes or the fear, she couldn't say. He would have taken them out 12 hours ago. Minimum. The house was as quiet as a tomb, a very tidy, well-organized tomb. The officers moved with the cautious grace of bomb disposal experts, their radios crackling with low murmurs. They cleared the main floor, which was Scott's undisputed territory. His favorite leather armchair was angled toward the TV at a perfect 45-degree angle. A neat stack of books on CIA interrogation techniques sat on the end table. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. It was so perfect, it was terrifying. The basement was next. It was less a basement and more a high-tech command center for a man waging a one-man war against household entropy. Every tool had its place on a massive pegboard, their outlines traced in black marker like a chalk outline at a tool murder scene. Nothing. "Upstairs is her zone," Kelly muttered, more to herself than to the cops. Officer Zimmerman, taking a deep breath, ascended the plushly carpeted stairs. "Laurel Police! Anyone home?" he called out, his voice sounding swallowed by the oppressive silence. Kelly waited at the bottom of the stairs, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. She heard a door creak open upstairs, then the low rumble of voices. A few minutes later, Zimmerman reappeared, his mustache looking even more grim than before. "There's a woman upstairs," he announced, as if this were a surprising development. "Says she's his wife. Name's Anne. Hasn't seen him since yesterday. Figured he was out and about." Kelly's blood turned to slush. She's been here this whole time? While the dogs were orchestrating a urine-based protest downstairs? While her daughter was having a full-blown panic attack? The sheer, baffling weirdness of it was overwhelming. It wasn't just that it didn't make sense. It was actively anti-sense. The officers finished their sweep. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no cryptic messages written in blood. Just a man who had seemingly evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only a very clean house and some very distressed dogs. "We'll put out a bolo," Zimmerman said, trying to sound helpful. "Be on the lookout. He'll show. Probably hit a jackpot at the casino and his phone died celebrating." Kelly just nodded, the motion feeling jerky and disconnected. The casino was his escape, sure, but he was never off the grid. He was a man who probably had a contingency plan for a dead phone battery that involved a satellite phone and a series of coded smoke signals. She left the house feeling hollowed out, clutching a few of her dad's sweatshirts as if they were holy relics. The image of the padlocks, the silent, enigmatic presence of her mother, the sad, urine-soaked dogs, it all swirled in her head, a surreal collage of domestic dread. That afternoon, she was on the phone with her older brother, Riley. He was equally baffled and terrified. They both agreed. The police check was a good start, but it felt like looking for a gas leak with a lit match. Someone needed to go back. Someone needed to do a real search. As the sun began its lazy descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Riley nominated himself as tribute. He enlisted a buddy for moral support, and then he did something truly, magnificently weird. For reasons that would later be debated by legal scholars and armchair detectives across the nation, he strapped a tiny GoPro camera to his chest, pressed the record button, and walked toward the house on Sycamore Ridge, a man about to star in his own found footage horror film. Chapter 3, in which a GoPro captures more than expected. The footage from Riley's GoPro would eventually become the Zapruder film of the Sycamore Ridge tragedy. It would be slowed down, brightened, enhanced, and argued over by people in expensive suits. But in its raw, unedited form, it was simply the terrifying home movie of a boy stumbling into a charnel house. The video opens with a shaky, first-person view of two pairs of sneakers crunching on a gravel driveway. The audio picks up the sound of their breath, misting in the frigid March air. The house looms ahead, a dark shape against the bruised twilight, its windows like vacant eyes. "Dad?" Riley calls out. His voice is small, swallowed by the vast, suburban quiet. They bypass the front door and circle around the side of the house, heading for the backyard where the monstrous wood boiler thing stood like a rusty sentinel. And that's when the sound happens. A sharp, metallic clank, followed by a dull thump. It comes from the dark patch of yard near the woodpile. "The hell was that?" the friend whispers, his voice cracking. The camera lurches as Riley, either brave or foolish, moves toward the noise. The GoPro's low-light sensor struggles valiantly, turning the world into a grainy, impressionistic mess of blacks and grays. They can just make out a large, lumpy shape on the ground. A heavy, dark blue tarp, the kind you buy at a hardware store for projects you never finish. The clank comes again, closer this time. From the deepest shadows near the house, another shadow detaches itself and scurries away. The camera catches only a flicker of movement, a phantom slipping back into the darkness. "Whoa, did you see that?" Riley breathes, his voice tight. They creep toward the tarp. The air is suddenly thick with the smells of wet leaves, cold dirt, and something else. Something vaguely sweet and coppery. Riley hesitates for a beat, his hand hovering in the frame. Then, with a visible tremor, he reaches down and grabs a corner of the heavy plastic. The camera, in a moment of cinematic mercy, does not capture what lies beneath. It doesn't have to, because Riley emits a sound that is not quite a gasp and not quite a scream, and he staggers backward as if he's been punched. His friend catches him, and the world goes haywire. The camera lens shows a spinning kaleidoscope of feet, sky, grass, and the pure, unadulterated visual noise of panic. But the microphone, the microphone captures everything. It captures the frantic, sobbing breaths. It captures the desperate crunch of sneakers on the driveway as they flee. And it captures Riley's voice, transformed from a tentative boy's call into a raw, ragged howl of primal terror. "Call 911. For the love of God. Just call 911. He runs, a headlong blind flight from the abomination under the tarp. He sprints across the perfectly manicured lawn, a screaming, terrified blur, heading for the sanctuary of the Cunninghams' brightly lit house, where his sister Kelly was waiting, about to graduate from frantic worry to life-altering horror. She heard the frantic hammering on the door and wrenched it open to find her brother. His face, a ghostly white mask of tears and sweat, his chest heaving like a spent marathon runner. "Riley? What is it? What happened?" He couldn't speak. He just stabbed a shaking finger back toward the dark house. His friend, standing behind him, managed to stammer out the words. He saw, "There's a body." He saw a body. Kelly doesn't remember the run across the lawn. She remembers the sensation of cold air searing her lungs and the ground coming up to meet her with a hard, unforgiving thump. She collapsed at the edge of her father's property line, the damp chill of the grass seeping through her jeans. And then she screamed. It was a long, ragged sound, a scream for the silence to be broken by anything but this, for the nightmare to rewind and let them all wake up. But the nightmare was just getting started. For the second time in less than 12 hours, Officer Matt Zimmerman's cruiser screeched to a halt on Sycamore Ridge. This time, the flashing lights weren't a gentle inquiry. They were an announcement. They pulsed red and blue across the quiet street, painting the houses in the frantic, lurid colors of violence. This wasn't a wellness check anymore. This was a crime scene. He found Riley, the absurd GoPro still strapped to his chest like some bizarre piece of tech bro jewelry, pointing a trembling finger. There, he choked out, the word catching in his throat. Under the tarp, he's covered. Zimmerman walked over to the lumpy shape on the ground. He took a breath, knelt, and lifted the corner of the tarp. And there, in the cold, indifferent Maryland dirt, lay the master of the house. The high priest of routine, the man who loved his house more than anything, Scott Horn, was dead. Part 2. The Baffling Investigation. Chapter 4. In which a detective meets a suspect who is entirely too calm. Detective Kezzy Henderson moved through the crime scene like a shark through water, smoothly, silently, and with an unnerving sense of purpose. The backyard of the house on Sycamore Ridge had been transformed from a suburban oasis into a garish, floodlit stage for a tragedy. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze like sad party streamers. Uniformed cops milled about, their faces grim, their boots carefully avoiding any potential evidence. Henderson was a man who appreciated the subtleties of a murder scene. He'd learned that killers, for all their bluster, were often terrible storytellers. They left behind a narrative full of plot holes and discordant details, and this scene was a discordant symphony. First, there was the sheer, over-the-top brutality of it. The ME would later lay out the grisly specifics. One gunshot to the neck from behind, a classic ambush. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the overture. After Scott Horn was on the ground, helpless, the killer had proceeded to beat him with what the crime scene techs were fairly certain was a log of firewood. It wasn't just murder, it was a demolition. Find the log? Henderson asked a tech, his voice a low rumble. Nope, but we've got a theory, the tech said, jerking a thumb toward the hulking, rust-colored boiler system a few feet away. A lazy plume of smoke drifted from its chimney. You're kidding me, Henderson sighed. Victim's own personal high-efficiency evidence incinerator. The irony is thicker than the smoke. The second discordant detail was the victim's resume, ex-FBI. You don't just sneak up on an ex-FBI agent in his own backyard. These guys were professionally paranoid. They checked their six before taking out the recycling. This wasn't a random mugging. A mugger doesn't meticulously cover the body with a tarp. A mugger doesn't hang around to engage in an extended session of firewood-based bludgeoning. This was personal. This was rage. This was the grand finale of a very long, very ugly story. As Henderson was absorbing the violent poetry of the scene, a new character made her entrance. The front door of the house creaked open, spilling warm yellow light onto the porch. A woman stood there, silhouetted. She was leaning on a single crutch, and her face wore an expression of mild, almost bored confusion. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice remarkably steady. "This is a bit much for a Thursday night, isn't it?" It was Ann Allen, wife of the deceased, mother of the traumatized children currently being wrapped in blankets by paramedics. And, apparently, a woman utterly unfazed by the small army of law enforcement officers currently treating her lawn like a forensic playground. Henderson's internal alarms, usually a low hum, began to clang like a 5-alarm fire bell. He had interviewed dozens of people who had just discovered their spouse had been murdered. He was a connoisseur of grief, an expert in the many shades of shock and devastation. He was not seeing any of them on Ann Allen's face. He was seeing the mild annoyance of someone whose favorite TV show had been interrupted. He intercepted her on the porch and gently guided her into the kitchen. The kitchen was a pristine, granite, and stainless steel marvel, a room clearly belonging to a man who alphabetized his spice rack. As they sat at the massive island, Henderson chose his words like a man laying a minefield. "Ma'am, there's been an incident outside. We found a deceased person in the yard." Ann's eyes widened, but only just. A flicker. "Oh my," she said, her tone suggesting she'd just been informed that the price of eggs was going up. A deceased person? How awful. Do you know where your husband Scott is? She asked a moment later. This was it. The moment of truth. Henderson leaned forward slightly. Ma'am, he said, his voice soft but firm, the person in the yard is your husband. He watched her face, waiting for the dam to break, waiting for the scream, the tears, the collapse. Nothing. She blinked. A slow, reptilian blink. Then she launched into the most bizarre, rapid-fire brainstorming session Henderson had ever witnessed. It must have been his gambling, she said, nodding to herself. He was always at that casino, flashing cash. You know how those places are, full of unsavory types. Someone probably followed him home. She took a breath. Or the tenants. He just evicted some people, terrible people. They were probably furious. It was definitely the tenants. Another breath. Unless it was his old job. The FBI. He put away a lot of dangerous men. Cartel guys, bank robbers. One of them must have gotten out and came looking for revenge. You should check with the Bureau. I'm sure they have a list. She was a fire hose of alternative theories, a human red herring generator. She painted a picture of Scott Horn as a swashbuckling combination of James Bond and a slumlord, a man who navigated a daily gauntlet of mortal threats. But Henderson had already made a few calls. Scott's gambling involved nickel and dime poker games where he mostly broke even. His dangerous FBI career had, for the past decade, consisted of doing background checks on aspiring postal workers. The dad schedule, his colleagues called it, the only real, verifiable, long-term source of rage, conflict, and soul-crushing misery in Scott Horn's life, according to everyone Henderson had spoken to, was the serenely unruffled woman sitting across the granite island from him, who was now calmly suggesting they check for mob connections. Chapter 5, in which we hear conflicting reports about the deceased. Every investigation is a battle of narratives, and Detective Henderson soon found himself drowning in them. The official narrative, the one you'd see on a real estate listing, was of a beautiful home on a quiet street. The competing narrative, supplied by everyone who knew the Horns, was that the house on Sycamore Ridge was less a home and more a psychological experiment in marital warfare gone horribly wrong. Scott's former FBI partner, a tough-as-nails woman named Debbie Wrightson-Tessier, provided the bluntest assessment. I told him to run, she said to Henderson, her voice raw with a mixture of grief and anger. I said, Scott, that woman is going to be the death of you. Pack a bag and disappear. But he was stubborn. He loved that stupid house, and he wouldn't abandon his kids to her. Debbie painted a picture of Anne as a Jekyll and Hyde character, capable of cloying sweetness one minute and pure, acid-laced venom the next. She told Henderson about a conversation that now seemed chillingly prophetic. Anne, complaining about the divorce proceedings, had allegedly spat, He loves this house. I hate this house. If he thinks he's getting it, he's got another thing coming. I will take this house and everything else he has. I know how to do it. If the friend's stories were alarming, the children's were the stuff of a gothic horror novel. In the fluorescent-lit sterility of an interview room, Kelly Horn, looking small and broken, recounted a childhood spent navigating the minefield of her mother's moods. The stories tumbled out of bizarre, draconian punishments for minor infractions, of a home life governed by fear and intimidation. The tipping point, she said, was a fight over a pair of shoes she had borrowed without permission. The punishment for this heinous crime, according to Kelly, Anne made her sleep in the upstairs hallway for nearly 3 months. My dad finally had enough, Kelly whispered, hugging herself tightly. He confronted her. He said I was a kid, not a prisoner, and I was getting my room back. And my mom, she just snapped. The story that followed was the one that made every cop in the precinct stop what they were doing and listen. Kelly described Anne, in the middle of this argument, calmly reaching into the pocket of her bathrobe, pulling out a small, snub-nosed handgun, and pointing it right at Scott's heart. We have an agreement, she said. I handle the discipline. You stay out of it. This is your only warning. Scott, the man trained to handle hostage situations and armed standoffs, had done the only thing he could. He backed down. He grabbed Kelly and walked out of the house, his only advice to his shell-shocked daughter being, If you ever see that gun again, don't hesitate. Call 911. If true, it was a game changer. It elevated Anne from a merely difficult and possibly unstable spouse to someone capable of cold, premeditated, armed threats. A search of police records only deepened the abyss. No fewer than 15 separate calls to the Sycamore Ridge address in 5 years. Domestic disputes, allegations of assault flying in both directions. A flurry of protective orders filed, withdrawn, and refiled. It wasn't a marriage. It was a low-grade, long-term hostage crisis. And at the center of it all was the house, the prize. Scott had poured his blood, sweat, and a truly heroic amount of money from Home Depot into it. Anne, it seemed, was willing to go to biblical lengths to make sure he never got to enjoy it. Then there was Anne's alibi, which was starting to look as full of holes as a block of Swiss cheese. She claimed she was home all day, sleeping off a long shift. That meant she was upstairs when Kelly and Officer Zimmerman had come for the wellness check. How do you sleep through cops knocking on your door? How do you not hear your own dogs staging a loud, frantic, urine-based protest just one floor below you? Riley's GoPro footage provided another damning detail. He was now certain that the fleeting, shadowy figure he saw scurrying away from the tarp just before he made the discovery was his mother. He recognized the way she moved. Henderson's working theory was now a full-blown screenplay of domestic horror. Anne, stewing in a potent cocktail of resentment and rage, had simply decided that divorce was too inefficient. She knew Scott's routine. She knew he'd come home from the casino and head out back to feed his precious boiler. She had waited for him. She had shot him. Then, in a final, cathartic explosion of fury, had beaten him with the very wood he used to heat their contested home. The missing wallet and phone were a clumsy piece of misdirection. The wood chips with Scott's DNA, later discovered by the crime lab in the washing machine, were the sloppy postscript of a failed cleanup. The list of potential suspects had been whittled down with brutal efficiency. It wasn't the cartel. It wasn't a disgruntled tenant. All signs pointed to the woman sleeping in the master suite, the one who had heard nothing, seen nothing, and had a dozen alternative theories ready to go. Part 3. The Awkward Accusation. Chapter 6. In which a suspect becomes a defendant and a contractor gets a raw deal. For 3.5 long, weird months, an uneasy quiet descended upon Sycamore Ridge. The police tape vanished, but the house remained a local landmark of notoriety. Neighborhood kids would dare each other to run up and touch the front door. Kelly and Riley were couch surfing with friends, the idea of sleeping under that roof again being about as appealing as gargling with wasps. Anne, in a move of spectacular oddness, checked into a local Best Western, living out of a suitcase just a few miles from the crime scene. From her hotel room, Anne conducted a quiet PR campaign. To her small circle of loyal friends, like the ever-faithful Rita Lipinski, she was a tragic figure, a grieving widow being railroaded by incompetent police and her own ungrateful children. Annie? A killer? Rita scoffed. To anyone who would listen. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. This is a woman who spent 30 years as a nurse. She hummed lullabies to sick babies and wounded soldiers. The only thing Anne is guilty of is being too kind for this cruel world. Her divorce lawyer, Lauren Kalakis, spun a different but equally compelling narrative. The police, she argued, had been completely snowed by Scott and the kids. Anne wasn't a villain. She was just an old-fashioned mom trying to instill some discipline in a household where her husband played the role of super fun, permissive dad to a fault. And Kelly? She wasn't a victim. She was a teenage nightmare, a rebellious delinquent who was probably making the whole thing up for attention. The story about the gun, Kalakis would say with a dramatic eye roll, pure fantasy, a desperate ploy by a daughter to win the divorce for her father. We have records. Anne has never so much as owned a water pistol. The investigators, however, were not buying the street Anne of the gauze pads routine. Their circumstantial case was starting to look less like a web and more like a reinforced steel cage. There was the neighbor's Nest Cam footage, which, when reviewed, showed Anne, on different days, strolling around her yard with the brisk, crutch-free energy of a power walker, suggesting her limp was, perhaps, situational. There were the increasingly unhinged voicemails she had left for the Cunninghams. railing about Scott in a way that made her sound less like a grieving widow and more like a woman auditioning for a role as a movie villain. And then there was Jason Berg. Jason was the wild card,